You know what's the most satisfying thing to see? It's professionals of any field riling people up with basic facts backed up by their experience, even if they didn't intend on making a political statement. Now in sports, I don't think we've seen many examples similar to what you're about to see, because the celebrated tennis star Rafael Nadal just torched this reporter's question around the gender pay gap in male and female tennis. Just take a look at this.
Quería preguntarte que, a pesar de que aquí no pase y que en los 4 Grand Slam haya equiparación salarial entre mujeres y hombres, en muchos otros torneos esto no ocurre. ¿Qué opinión te merece que las mujeres cobren menos que los hombres en el tenis y que en qué crees que se basa esa desigualdad? Gracias.
Pues no lo sé. No sé en qué se basa en el fútbol, o en el golf, o en el modelaje. No sé. ¿Por qué las mujeres ganan más que los hombres en el tema de la moda? Pues no lo sé. Pero ahí sí que tampoco hablamos todo el día de diferencia salarial.
Of all the places where the gender pay gap could be discussed, there's something about the world of sports that sets it apart. You see, there's no such thing as a pay or salary to begin with, apart from a basic participation fee. The real money is by how much money the tournaments spin, the sponsors that come in, and the tickets and audience numbers the matches pull in. And it is that money from a prize money pool decided later, distributed unequally between the players according to their performance. For example, the prize money at the last WTA's final in 2023 was $9 million. The prize money for the men's ATP tennis tournament final was $15 million. It's easy for someone to look at that discrepancy and cry gender inequality at the sport, but the truth is that there's a complicated economics at play that takes a lot more into account. Men's tennis also tends to bring in more live attendees, more expensive TV rights, higher ticket sales, and more high-value sponsorships. It's important to note, however, that the drive for pay equality in the sport, despite underlying economics, has started to succeed. The women's tennis governing body, the WTA, has laid out a decade-long plan to slowly iron out the inequalities in the pay that still exist, but what's interesting is that even the WTA admits it's going to take some time to, quote, ensure the changes are sustainable for players in tournaments in the long term. That refers to making it financially stable, which means trying to tackle the inadequacies that result in the pay inequity. If they can pull it off, that's a laudable goal. Tennis is perhaps the one sport where there is a relatively smaller distance between the men and women's categories than other sports like football, rugby, or cricket.
¿Qué más quiero yo que los hombres y las mujeres seamos exactamente igual y tengamos todos los mismos derechos, ¿no? A quien gane más, quien gane menos, pues es una cosa que en algunos aspectos del tema laboral las mujeres ganarán más, en otros los hombres ganarán más, y lo único que se tiene que conseguir es que no por ser hombre o por ser mujer se gane más o se gane menos. Se tiene que ganar más o se tiene que ganar menos por la calidad de tu trabajo o por lo que tú seas capaz de vender o generar. Todo lo demás, lo siento, pero es hipocresía y no voy a defender ni voy a decir nada más de lo que...
That's actually a good starting point for the debate. When you're grounding the argument in economics, there's not a lot of room left to chalk it all up to gender discrimination. The modeling industry is a perfect example, because for decades, male models have fallen very short of making the same amount of money as their female counterparts. Female models consistently rake in up to 75% more than the men, even when put against the most successful male models in the industry like David Gandy and Sean O'Prye. Is that because of gender discrimination against men? Of course not. It's all down to the simple fact that women on average spend a lot more money on clothing, fashion, and jewelry than men do. That means bigger revenues for the companies, a higher demand for female models, and more money paid to them as a result. Plus, men want to look at women models, not male models. But in the modern world, there's nothing that pays more financial dividends than the security of stable assets like precious metals. That's the move to diversification that a company like Birch Gold helps you make. So, click the link in the description or text the word FFIRA to 989898 to get started right away. Now, whether it's the modeling industry or sports, no one's saying that we shouldn't stand against it if there is an inequity that truly exists because of discrimination. But that can't be the most immediate conclusion every time. Not at least before we've run through the numbers. For someone who is arguably the biggest name to have come out of women's tennis in the last few decades, Serena Williams, the difference between men and women's tennis is vividly clear.
Actually, it's funny because Andy Murray, he was been joking about myself and him playing a match, and I'm like, Andy, seriously, like, are you kidding me? Because for me, tennis and men's tennis and women's tennis are completely almost two separate sports. So I'm like, if I were to play Andy Murray, I would lose 6-0, 6-0 in 5 to 6 minutes, maybe 10 minutes, because it's true. It's
honestly,
true. It's a completely different sport. The men are a lot faster, and they serve harder, they hit harder. It's just a different game, and I love to play women's tennis, and I only want to play girls because I don't want to be embarrassed. I would not do the tour.
The debate around pay also sometimes gets tied into the idea that people questioning whether male or female players are just as technically good at the sport as each other. Serena Williams is just one such name to chime in, but this debate stretches back almost 5 decades ago to the so-called Battle of the Sexes in the 1970s. To cut the long story short, Bobby Riggs, a 55-year-old former tennis legend, challenged the then top-ranked female player Margaret Court, claiming he could still beat her in his older age because men are simply better at the sport. The challenge was accepted by Margaret, and the match quickly became the center of a much larger debate around gender relations in sports. And what happened? Well, Bobby easily beat her in a match in 1973, despite being decades older in age. However, another tennis legend, Billie Jean King, wasn't going to let the matter settle so quickly, and instead put herself forward to face Bobby Riggs in a rematch. Bobby Riggs was then beaten decisively by Billie Jean King. All of this reveals one thing: the debate around who's better or who should get paid more is a lot more layered and complicated than our modern gender wars can do justice. Perhaps that's what irked Rafael Nadal about the question, and it seems like this isn't just limited to one area or sports. Watch Ronda Rousey, one of the most prominent female fighters in the UFC, take down a similarly phrased question about how much money the organization pays out to men versus women.
We've got quite a large pay dispute happening with our Australian women's soccer team at the moment. Is it frustrating for you as someone who's so prominent in your sport? And we heard you say on the Ellen show the other day you are the richest fighter in UFC, that sort of thing is still going on?
I think that how much you get paid should have something to do with how much money you bring in. I'm the highest paid fighter, not because Dana and Lorenzo wanted to do something nice for the ladies. They do it because I bring in the highest numbers. They do it because I make them the most money. And I think that the money that they make should be proportionate to the money that they bring in.
And that's something on the business side of things that a lot of people do not get. If an organization or sports federation is making a lot of money from you, it actually directly benefits them to retain you with a higher pay. Otherwise, there's other teams, organizations, and brands that are always looking to court the best fighters and players to their side and profit from the audience they bring. And perhaps tennis is one sport where the gap in viewership and profitability between men and women's categories is the smallest of all other sports. That sets an encouraging precedent for other sports to follow.